The fair-haired boy lowered himself down the last stretch of rock and made his way toward the lagoon, dragging the school sweater he had taken off in one hand. He felt the gray shirt sticking to his skin and his hair plastered to his forehead in an environment where the surrounding jungle was bathed in steam, revealing a deep scar. He was struggling through creepers and broken trunks when he heard a shout asking him to wait a second, as the owner of the voice was caught in the blessed creepers. The fair boy stopped and instinctively pulled up his socks, a gesture that for a moment seemed to transform the jungle into a wood near London. The other boy, who was shorter and very fat, with bare, scraped knees, emerged from the undergrowth walking backward. Looking for a safe place for his feet, he glanced over his thick glasses and asked about the man with the megaphone. The fair boy shook his head, explaining that they were on an island. At least it seemed so to him, and that there were no grown-ups anywhere. This news alarmed the fat boy, who asked about the pilot and the other passengers. The fair-haired boy, forcing himself to remain calm, stated that he didn't think there were any more adults. Immediately he was overcome by the joy of an accomplished ambition, leaping and doing a half-turn in the center of the jungle's scar, exclaiming, "Not a single grown-up." The fat boy remembered the pilot, but the fair-haired one theorized that he must have left after dropping them off, as it was impossible to land there. The fat boy gestured in denial, saying he had seen the other part of the plane in flames as they descended. He pointed to the scar in the jungle, indicating that the plane's cabin had done all of that. Ralph, the fair-haired boy, thought for a moment about what might have happened to the cabin and where it could be. The fat boy suggested that the storm had washed it out to sea and that some boys might still be inside. To Ralph's question about his name, the fat boy replied. The fat boy expected the same sign of friendship, but Ralph just smiled vaguely and started walking toward the lagoon, followed determinedly by the fat boy. The fat boy explained that his aunt had told him not to run because of his asthma, and with some pride, he mentioned being the only boy in school with asthma and having worn glasses since he was 3. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his grimy windbreaker, and put them back on, then moved aside to look for fruit among the foliage. Ralph slipped away quietly, and soon found himself out of the jungle, facing a shore adorned with palm trees. Beneath the palms, the ground formed a grassy bank, broken by roots and littered with rotten coconuts. Ralph stopped, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water. A little over a kilometer away, white foam leaped over a coral reef, beyond which stretched the open sea of a dark blue. The lagoon, bordered by the reef, lay calm with infinite shades of blue, green, and purple. Ralph felt the weight of his clothes and the lash of the heat. He took off his shoes, his socks, his shirt, and finally his shorts and underpants. Naked, he contemplated the dazzling beach. Ralph, a little over 12 years old, had not yet acquired the lanky figure of an adolescent, and his broad shoulders suggested he could be a boxer. Filled with joy at the reality of the island, he laughed, jumped, and sat down to pile sand against his chest. The fat boy, Piggy, appeared, and sat down carefully on the edge of the terrace. He apologized for being late, cleaned his glasses, and observed Ralph's golden body. Piggy suggested they should make a list of everyone and have a meeting. Confidentially, he asked Ralph not to call him Piggy, the name they used at school. Ralph burst out laughing, shouting the name repeatedly. Piggy, though fearful, smiled reluctantly, seeing it as a sign of getting closer, as long as he didn't tell anyone else. Ralph walked toward a rectangular feature in the landscape, a large platform of pink granite that cut across the beach and formed a projecting jetty nearly 1.5 meters high. Fallen palm trees on it created a comfortable place to sit, and those still standing formed a green roof. Ralph climbed onto the platform, feeling the coolness in the shade, and looked out at the sea, so clear that the bottom with its seaweed and tropical coral was visible. He discovered a deep, long pool on the beach, enclosed by a wall of pink granite, which was only invaded by water at high tide. Ralph plunged into the water, which was warmer than his own blood. Piggy, sitting on the edge of the rock, told him he didn't even know how to swim. He took off his shoes and socks, tested the water with his big toe, and decided to get in. Piggy, with a pale and fleshy nakedness, sat covered in water up to his neck, but he couldn't swim because of his asthma. Ralph, who had known how to swim since he was 5, told him that his father was a commander in the Navy and would come to rescue them. Piggy, whose father was dead, lived with his aunt, who owned a candy store. He asked when his father would come. Piggy questioned how they would know they were there. Ralph thought they would be told at the airport. Piggy put on his glasses and revealed that the pilot had spoken of the atom bomb and that everyone was dead. Ralph, after thinking it over, confirmed that they were on an island. Piggy concluded, his lips trembling and his glasses fogging up, that they were alone and might stay there until they died. Ralph felt overwhelmed by the threatening heat. As Ralph dressed in his gray shirt, feeling a strange relief, Piggy climbed onto the platform and resumed the conversation. "We have to find the others. We have to do something." Ralph, ignoring the premonition, gave himself over to joyful daydreams. Piggy insisted on knowing how many of them there were. Ralph pointed toward the lagoon where something creamy white stood out among the seaweed. Piggy became cautiously excited. It was a conch. He remembered a boy who blew one to call his mother, and that they were very valuable. Ralph, distracted by his daydreams, stirred the water with a palm stem until he pushed the shell out of the weeds, and Piggy reached it. Piggy babbled about the conch's value. Ralph took it from him. It was a deep cream color with faded pink spots, almost half a meter long. Piggy suggested they could use it to call the others and have a meeting. Ralph asked how his friend blew it. Piggy explained that you had to blow from your stomach. Ralph tried several times until he finally launched the air from his diaphragm. The conch instantly erupted with a strident, deep note that echoed off the pink granite mountain. He put the conch to his lips again, and the note rose until it vibrated like a trumpet, with a high-pitched clamor. The sound attracted the first boy, a blond, sturdy 6-year-old with tattered clothes and a face stained with fruit. His name was Johnny. The clamor from the forest grew closer, and the beach filled with life. More boys arrived, sitting down to wait on the fallen logs. Piggy, struggling to remember them, asked their names, receiving the same obedience they would have given to the men with megaphones. They wore school uniforms of various colors, with crests and badges. Those arriving from the beach were drawn to a black shadow, like a bat, which the vertical sun reduced to a spot between their hurried feet. 2 twins with tow-colored hair named Sam and Eric arrived panting. Something dark, which turned out to be a group of boys marching in 2 parallel lines, was approaching. They wore black cloaks with large silver crosses and square black caps. The tropical heat had given their faces the appearance of a freshly washed plum. The boy in command was dressed the same but with a golden badge. This leader, Jack Meridew, asked for the man with the trumpet. Ralph answered that it was him. Jack, tall, thin, bony, with red hair and a freckled face that showed disappointment that would soon turn to anger, asked if there was no ship and no men. Jack ordered the choir to hold their formation, but one of the boys collapsed in a faint on the sand. Meridew explained that he was always fainting. Meridew asked Ralph if there were any grown-ups, and upon hearing the negative, he stated that they would have to look after themselves. Piggy tried to continue with the list of names. Meridew complained about being called Jack, and not Meridew, and then interrupted Piggy, calling him Fatty. Ralph shouted that his real name was Piggy, causing a general laugh that excluded Piggy, who turned very red. They decided to vote for a chief. Voting was as fun a toy for them as the conch. Although Piggy had shown intelligence and Jack had obvious leadership qualities, Ralph was elected by acclamation, influenced by his calm demeanor, height, attractiveness, and, above all, the inexplicable power of the conch. Ralph, to offer something to Jack in his humiliation, gave him command of the choir, suggesting they be the army or the hunters. Jack chose to be the hunters. Ralph, as chief, decided that 3 of them would go exploring to see if they were on an island. He chose Jack and Simon. Piggy tried to go, arguing that he was with Ralph when he found the conch, but Jack told him bluntly that they didn't want him for anything. Ralph turned to Piggy and told him he couldn't come, that he wasn't fit for the job. Piggy, his glasses fogged with humiliation, reproached Ralph for revealing his nickname, Piggy. Ralph, with the firmness of a true chief, said that Piggy was better than Fatty and gave him the task of taking down the remaining names. The 3 explorers, Ralph, Jack, and Simon, set off and felt happy, overcome by an enchanted atmosphere. They climbed the mountain, passing through a tangle of creepers. They were excited by the adventure of exploration. They discovered a large rock as big as a car, and together they pushed it to launch it into the void. The rock fell, whizzed through the air, and tore a deep hole in the forest canopy, rumbling as if it were an enraged monster. They shouted, "Awesome!" just like a bomb. Finally, they reached the top of the mountain. Ralph declared, "This is all ours." They confirmed that they were surrounded by water and that the island, which looked like the shape of a boat, was deserted. They saw a coral reef. Jack pointed to the scar where they had landed. Ralph concluded that they would have to find food and hunt while they waited to be rescued. They found shrubs that looked like green candles. Then they found a piglet trapped in a tangle of vines. Jack brandished his knife but hesitated, and the piglet freed itself and scurried away. Jack's face was white under his freckles. Ralph asked why he hadn't killed it. The 3 of them knew it would have been tremendous to see the knife descend and cut living flesh. The sight of blood would have been unbearable. Jack promised, "Next time there will be no mercy." Returning to the platform, Ralph sat with the conch on his knees. He announced that they were on a deserted island and that there was no one else. Jack interrupted, insisting on the need for an army to hunt pigs. Ralph established the fundamental rule: no one could speak without the conch, and only the one holding it could speak without interruption except for him. Piggy, taking the conch, laid out the harsh reality. No one knew where they were, and they could be there for a long time. Ralph, after the somber truth, smiled and suggested they could have a good time, like in the books. A little one, with a purple birthmark on his face, was pushed forward. He wanted to know what they would do about that snake thing, or beastie, he had seen at night. Ralph kindly explained that there couldn't be any wild beasts on an island of that size. The assembly grew restless. Jack took the conch, guaranteeing that if a snake thing existed, they would hunt it. Ralph felt he was facing something unattainable. Ralph proposed the most important idea. They needed a bonfire on the mountaintop to send up smoke, a signal for rescue. He declared that his father was in the Navy and that the Queen had maps of all the islands, so a ship would pass sooner or later. The boys broke into applause. Jack bellowed, "Come on! Follow me!" They forgot the conch, and the entire group ran toward the mountain, leaving Ralph and Piggy alone. On the mountain, they searched for firewood, which was often so rotten it crumbled. Ralph and Jack worked together as a team to haul a log, sharing a strange, invisible light of friendship, adventure, and joy. Once the pile was formed, they realized the shameful truth. They didn't know how to light the fire. Jack suggested rubbing 2 sticks together. Finally, Jack pointed to Piggy. "His specs. We'll use them as a burning glass." Jack snatched the glasses, and Piggy shrieked in terror. Ralph, kneeling, used the glasses to focus the sun, and soon a tiny flame appeared, fanned by Jack, which grew. The bonfire became a great, impetuous fire, with yellow flames and a red beard more than 5 meters high. Ralph shouted for more wood, in a race against the fire. The fire, fanned by the wind, became a wrathful arm of heat. Ralph observed that there were only flames, no smoke, which was useless. Piggy, sitting with the conch, criticized that the bonfire was too big to keep burning. Ralph established that a special group should look after the fire, and that wherever the conch was, there was a meeting, even on the mountain. Jack, holding the soot-covered conch, said they were English and should do the right thing. He divided the hunters into groups to tend the fire, proposing they use green branches to make smoke. Roger expressed his fear that they might never be rescued. Piggy, indignant at the lack of order, seized the conch and criticized that, instead of a small fire, they had made a pile like a hayrick. He pointed toward the hostile side of the mountain and let out a strange laugh. "There's your fire for you." The fire had taken hold of the jungle and was advancing like a wild animal. Acres of forest were furiously turning into smoke and flames. The boys froze and were filled with fear. Piggy, in the midst of the hysteria, asked who had been looking after the little ones. Ralph reminded him that he had told him to make a list of names. Piggy defended himself, saying he couldn't do it alone with the little ones running around like insects. Piggy, struggling to breathe, pointed at the fire and asked about the little one with the birthmark on his face. The one who talked about the snakes, who was nowhere to be seen. The boys looked at each other in fear. Meanwhile, Jack, naked to the waist and with his face painted, was crawling and tracking in the dense jungle, looking for pigs. He carried a long, sharpened stick and sniffed the warm air for information. The hunt consumed him. He hadn't managed to catch anything, but he felt the obsession and even the impression that in the jungle there was always something behind you. Ralph, working with Simon to build precarious shelters on the beach, complained that no one else was helping, and that only Simon had worked all day. The shelters were necessary because the little ones were scared and had nightmares, believing the beast or the snake thing was real. Jack complained about the lack of meat, and Ralph complained about the lack of shelters. Jack asked if Ralph was accusing him. Ralph and Jack faced off. Representing two different universes of experience and feelings, Ralph was obsessed with the smoke and rescue, while Jack only talked about hunting. Simon went alone into the forest, passing by the fruit trees, where he helped the little ones reach the fruit. He entered a clearing hidden by a very thick mat of creepers, where he sat in a kind of hut, seeking solitude. At midday, mirages made the sea rise and split into plains of impossibility, something Piggy wisely commented on. The European tradition of work and recreation prevented them from adapting to the new tropical rhythm. The younger ones, the little uns, lived their own lives, eating fruit unscrupulously, suffering from stomach aches and night terrors. They obeyed the conch, but rarely bothered with the older ones. Roger and Maurice, finishing their shift at the bonfire, went down for a swim. Roger kicked down the Litland sandcastles. Roger stood watching a Litland, Henry, who was playing at the water's edge, absorbed in his dominion over tiny, transparent creatures. Roger, unseen by anyone, threw stones at Henry with a deliberate intention to miss. Roger's arm was conditioned by the taboo of civilization and the law. Jack called Roger. He wanted to paint his face to hunt, seeking camouflage. Jack used white clay, red clay, and charcoal. Seeing his reflection in a coconut shell full of water, he saw not his own face, but that of a fearsome stranger. He began to dance, liberated from shame and responsibility by the mask. Piggy, sitting next to Ralph on the beach, suggested making a sundial with a stick. Ralph scoffed, thinking of planes and televisions, but Piggy, feeling Ralph's smile as sympathy, was pleased. Ralph swam, finding no comfort in the water from the mention of rescue. Suddenly, Ralph shouted, "Smoke! Smoke!" A ship was passing on the horizon. Ralph, Simon, and Maurice looked towards the mountain. Piggy, who couldn't see well, asked if there was any smoke left. The signal fire was out. The lookouts were gone. Ralph ran, stumbling, shouting at the ship, "Come back! Come back!" He searched for the ugliest word and said they had let that bloody fire go out. In the distance, they saw a procession. Jack, at the head, came with his hunters, chanting as Sam and Eric carried a stake with the gutted body of a pig. The chant was, "Kill the pig. Cut her throat. Spill her blood." Jack, his face smeared, explained that they had killed a pig and that he had cut its throat. Ralph, without moving, insisted, "You let the fire go out." Jack was flustered, recognizing his fault. Ralph, in a violent voice, told them that a ship had passed and they could have gone home. Piggy, in the pain of what was lost, shouted, "You and your blood, Jack Meridew!" You and your hunting. We could have gone home. Jack, carried away by violence and humiliation, punched Piggy in the stomach. Then he hit him on the head, and Piggy's glasses flew through the air, one of the lenses breaking. Piggy now had only one eye. Ralph, indignant, refused to accept Jack's insincere apology. He ordered him to light the bonfire. Since Jack had no way to do it, Ralph took Piggy's broken glasses and lit the fire, feeling that the bond that tied him to Jack had been broken. Jack took charge of butchering the pig. Ralph devoured a piece of meat, unable to resist his hunger. Jack refused to give Piggy any meat because he hadn't hunted. Simon, without a word, slid his piece of meat to Piggy, ashamed. Jack, in a burst of fury, threw another piece at Simon and shouted that he had brought meat for everyone and had painted his face. The hunters relieved mimiced the hunt, with Maurice playing the pig. They chanted again, "Kill the pig! Cut her throat! Bash her in!" Ralph, with envy and resentment, summoned an assembly with the conch. Ralph reflected that his life on the island was discouraging. With every path and improvisation, he thought he needed to be serious, that there should be no room for misunderstandings, and that Piggy knew how to think, even if he wasn't fit to be chief. Ralph addressed the assembly, explaining that they had to put things in order. He reminded them of the broken rules. They didn't bring water and coconut shells, the shelters weren't finished, and they didn't use the designated rocks as lavatories. The most important thing was the bonfire. We ought to die before we let the fire go out. He decreed that there would only be fire on the mountain. Then he introduced the topic of fear. Jack took the conch and ridiculed the little ones for their fear and nightmares. He assured them there were no large animals, only wild pigs. Piggy, with his clean glasses, said that life was a scientific thing, and that there was nothing to fear, unless we get frightened of people. A little one named Phil recounted his nightmare, saying he saw something big and horrid moving among the trees. Simon admitted that he had gone out to a place I know at night. Ralph scolded him, as the Litlans might mistake him for the beast. Another Litlan, Percival Wemyss Madison, began to cry and babble his name and address. Maurice saved them by faking a fall. Percival mumbled that the beast came out of the sea. Maurice argued that there were unknown sea animals, like squids hundreds of meters long. Ralph feared that this was the beginning of madness. Simon, his voice choked by his heart, said, Maybe there is a beast. Maybe it's only us." Jack let out a vulgar word, causing a paroxysm of relief and laughter. The assembly broke up. Ralph, seeing them leave, feared that if he blew the conch and they didn't come back, then we're done for. There'll be no more fire. We'll be like animals. Piggy warned him that Jack hated him. Ralph hesitated, but Piggy begged him not to give up being chief, as Jack would only focus on hunting. The desperate wish of the three boys, Ralph, Piggy, and Simon, was to receive a message or a sign from the world of grown-ups. Later, Sam and Eric, on the mountain tending the fire, saw something. The creature seemed hairy, it moved, and it had eyes, teeth, and claws. The figure was actually a dead parachutist that inflated and flapped in the wind. The twins fled in terror, believing they had seen the beast. Ralph called an assembly where Sam and Eric, trembling, described the beast. Jack, excited, saw it as a real hunt. Piggy suggested that the beast might not come near them, but Ralph insisted that they had to light the bonfire. Jack dared to say that the conch was no longer necessary, that he knew who should speak. Ralph, his blood hot, ordered Jack to sit down. Ralph, regaining authority by reminding them of the importance of rescue, convinced everyone to go look for the beast at Castle Rock, the only place they hadn't explored. Ralph, Jack, and the older boys set out on the hunt. Simon, walking beside Ralph, felt disbelief at the idea of the beast. Timidly, he told Ralph, "You'll get back to where you came from. I'm sure of it." Ralph, in the middle of the march, daydreamed of his home in England, remembering wild ponies, snowflakes, and books. A wild boar charged at him, and Ralph, calmly judging the distance, threw his stick at it, wounding it in the snout. The boar escaped, but Ralph felt proud and valued the hunt, believing this was the beast. Jack, frustrated, showed his forearm scratched by the boar's tusks. Jack proposed making a circle to play the hunting game. Robert played the boar, screaming first in feigned terror and then in real pain. Ralph, carried away by a sudden, strong excitement, prodded Robert with the spear. They all sang, "Kill the pig! Cut her throat! Kill the pig! Bash her in!" Ralph felt an irresistible desire to attack and hurt. Jack joked that they could use one of the little uns to play the pig. Jack, Ralph, and Roger climbed the mountain alone to confirm the beast. Ralph, despite his fear, felt hatred for Jack because of his sarcasm. Jack, returning alone, was trembling and stammering, saying he had seen something that bulged. Ralph, Jack, and Roger advanced stealthily. Near the hollow of the bonfire, they saw a lump that looked like a huge ape sitting with its head between its knees. When the wind blew, the being lifted its head, showing the ruin of a face. Ralph fled in terror, and the mountain was left deserted. At dawn, Jack, blowing the conch unskillfully, called an assembly. Ralph, Piggy, and Simon attended. Jack, after describing the terror of the beast, accused Ralph of being a coward, comparing him to Piggy, and claimed he was not a true chief. Jack asked, who thought Ralph should not be chief? No one raised their hand. Humiliated, Jack declared he was going off on his own, inviting anyone who wanted to hunt with him to join. He left, shedding copious tears. Piggy was glad Jack was gone, suggesting they build a bonfire on the platform since they couldn't go up the mountain. The idea, the most brilliant so far, was welcomed with enthusiasm, and Piggy helped carry the wood. They used Piggy's glasses to light it, and they had smoke and flames. Ralph, Piggy, and the twins noticed that Morris, Roger, and other hunters had joined Jack. Simon went to the clearing where he had been before, with the Lord of the Flies, the boar's head, stuck on a stake. The pig's head smiled in a grimace, surrounded by flies. Jack and his new tribe had killed a large sow, stabbing it repeatedly. Roger plunged his spear with all his weight. Jack slit her throat, and the warm blood spurted onto his hands. Roger was pleased with the discovery. Jack ordered a stick to be sharpened at both ends and stuck the boar's head on the stake, declaring it an offering to the beast. Simon, contemplating the head, felt his skepticism, and the head spoke to him in a hallucination. "You are a silly little boy." The head identified itself as the beast. "I'm the beast." "Part of you?" "Close, close, close. I'm the reason why it's no go." The Lord of the Flies threatened Simon with the violence of the others. "We are going to have fun on this island. Understand? We are going to have fun on this island. So don't try it on, my poor misguided boy, or else we shall do you. See? Jack and Roger and Morris and Robert and Bill and Piggy and Ralph. Do you? See? Simon lost consciousness. The clouds gathered and the atmosphere became oppressive. Simon awoke and, with a sad resolution, headed for the mountain. He saw the corpse of the parachutist, freeing it from its ropes, understanding that the monster was harmless and horrible. He ran to give the news to the others. Ralph and Piggy, deciding to go to Jack's feast, arrived at the Castle Rock area. Jack, painted and garlanded, sat like an idol with piles of meat. Ralph and Piggy ate. Jack asked them who would join his tribe. Ralph insisted that he was the chief because of the conch and the bonfire. The storm broke. Jack incited the dance. "Do our dance! Come on, dance!" Ralph and Piggy joined in, feeling a craving to belong to that demented but partly secure society. The rhythmic chant rose. "Kill the beast! Cut his throat! Spill his blood!" Simon came crawling out of the forest. Amidst the lightning and thunder, the circle of boys, dominated by a blind desire, mistook him for the beast. Simon was shouting something about a dead man on a hill, but no one heard him. The boys leaped, shouted, struck, bit, and tore at Simon. Simon's small body lay motionless on the sand, his blood staining it. The wind pushed the figure of the parachute, which passed over the lagoon and fell into the sea. Simon's dead body, fringed with phosphorescent creatures, moved out to sea with the tide. Ralph and Piggy, the next day, met. Ralph, trembling, murmured, "That was Simon. That was murder." Piggy vehemently denied it, blaming the darkness, the fear, and Simon's madness. It was an accident. He asked for it. Piggy convinced Ralph to lie to the twins, saying they had been outside the circle. Sam and Eric arrived with firewood, denying they had attended the end of the feast and avoiding the topic of the dance. Roger, at Castle Rock, saw how they had wedged a log under the highest rock to use as a lever. Robert informed him that Jack was going to beat Wilfred, who was tied up and waiting, though he didn't know why. Roger reflected on irresponsible authority. Jack, the chief, warned his savages that the beast might try to get in disguised. Jack decided to steal fire from the others that night. Ralph, Piggy, and the twins tried unsuccessfully to keep the fire going. Piggy suggested letting it go out at night and lighting it in the morning. That night, while they were sleeping, the sound of a stick breaking was heard. A voice murmured, "Piggy, Piggy." Piggy had an asthma attack, and the savages invaded the shelter. Ralph and the twins fought back, returning blows and kicks. The savages fled, and Ralph realized they had come for Piggy, but he wondered what they had taken. Jack, running back to Castle Rock, carried Piggy's broken glasses in his hand. The next morning, Ralph realized with anger, "They've taken our fire. They've stolen it." Piggy, now blind, insisted on calling an assembly. Ralph sat on the log and let himself be carried away by Piggy's weeping. Ralph lamented, "We haven't got any signal now. And perhaps a ship's passing right now. And they all think he'd be the best chief." Piggy, desperate, decided to go to Castle Rock to demand his glasses back, appealing to what is right. Ralph and the twins offered to accompany him. The twins feared the savages' paint, which gave them license for savage acts. Ralph insisted, "No paint, because we aren't savages." The four of them, Ralph limping and Piggy holding the conch, headed for Castle Rock. On the isthmus, Roger, the lookout, threw a stone with the intention to miss, frightening the twins. Jack appeared, painted black and green, with the decapitated carcass of a pig on his back. Jack told Ralph to leave. Ralph, enraged, called him a thief. Jack launched himself at Ralph, and they fought with their spears, using them like sabers. Ralph calmed down and demanded the return of Piggy's glasses and the relighting of the signal fire. Ralph called them painted fools. Jack ordered his tribe to tie up Sam and Eric. Jack shouted, "See? They do what I want." Ralph shouted at Jack, "You're a beast, and a swine, and a bloody, bloody thief," and lunged. Piggy raised the conch, and the jeering fell silent. Piggy, appealing to civilization, asked, "Which is better, to be a pack of painted Indians like you are, or to be sensible like Ralph is? And which is better, to have rules and agree, or to hunt and kill?" Roger, high up with delirious abandonment, leaned his whole weight on the lever. Ralph heard the huge rock before he saw it. The rock struck Piggy, and the conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments. Piggy fell 40 feet, his head splitting open. The sea absorbed him. Jack, exultant, shouted, "The conch is gone. I'm chief." He threw his spear at Ralph, wounding him in the ribs. Ralph fled into the jungle. Jack and Roger forced Sam and Eric to join the tribe with spear jabs. Roger approached the twins with a mysterious authority. Ralph, wounded, hid. He saw Roger, with the spear standing guard, and the smoke from the feast's fire. Ralph felt banished, without the fire, without Piggy, and with the conch destroyed. Ralph returned to the clearing with the pig's head. The skull, white and grinning, looked at him as if it knew all the answers. Ralph, in a fit of rage, struck it furiously. Ralph returned to the thicket opposite Castle Rock. He heard the tribes chant, "Kill the beast! Cut his throat! Spill his blood!" Ralph saw that Sam and Eric were the new lookouts and accepted that they had joined the tribe. Ralph crawled up and called to them. Sam and Eric, terrified and stammering, warned him that Jack and Roger planned to hunt and kill him with a spear sharpened at both ends, like a pig. Ralph hid in a thick thicket, which he considered a safe lair. At dawn, Jack, Roger, and one of the twins, who had been interrogated with screams of pain, knew his hiding place. Jack ordered the gigantic rock remaining at the top to be pushed. The rock thundered and was lost in the sea. Ralph prepared himself. Smoke filtered through the branches. They were burning the thicket to flush him out. Ralph thrust his spear at an approaching savage, wounding him. Ralph understood that they were using fire to sweep the jungle from shore to shore. He ran in a desperate race, with the fire advancing like a tide. He forgot everything but terror. The fire reached the shelters. Ralph, exhausted and bloodied, rolled onto the warm sand. He knelt, looked up, and saw a huge white-topped cap with a visor, a crown, and a gold anchor. A naval officer stood there, looking at Ralph with suspicion and astonishment. The hunter's chant died away. The officer asked if there were any grown-ups. Ralph shook his head. A semicircle of painted children had stopped behind him. The officer, seeing the fire in the scene, asked if they were having a war or something. Ralph nodded and admitted that only 2 had been killed. The officer whistled softly. Little Percival Wemyss Madison tried to remember his name and address, but the incantation had faded completely. The officer asked who the boss was. Ralph said, "I am." Jack stepped forward with his red hair and Piggy's broken glasses at his waist, but changed his mind. The officer, thinking about the job of counting them, said that for English boys they weren't putting on a very good show. Ralph said they had at the beginning, before things went wrong. The officer nodded kindly. Like in the Coral Island. Ralph, looking at the scorched island, burst into tears. He wept for the loss of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true, wise friend called Piggy. The officer, moved and uncomfortable, waited, looking out at the splendid cruiser.